So, Dan,
Hey.
I'm excited to be chatting with you a bit. We're dealing with this shift in business that's happened, and this new era. It's not about AI; it's about talent, and how it's not just about hiring talent where you happen to have an office, but anywhere where that talent happens to be. And I'm excited to talk, not just because of Deel's hypergrowth, over 100 countries, 2,500 employees, but also because you help enable that growth of other companies so they can scale globally. So a lot of these concepts around growth are talked about in my book, Global Class. And I think that Deel is a great example of what we call a global class company, playing on the words best in class, first class, world class, companies that think differently than legacy companies. But before we get into things around talent, I want to talk a little bit about some of the major pillars that companies that are looking to scale need to think about to be able to reach hypergrowth. So Peter Drucker, I think it was, famously said, culture eats strategy for lunch. So let's start there. So one thing we talk about is this notion of universalizing core values. And so some of core values that you guys have around genuine care, deal speed, how do you spread those at global scale with people everywhere?
So the two values that you mentioned, genuine care and deal speed, are based on little anecdotes that I would like to go through. First of all, we'll start with deal speed. Deal speed is the concept of attending to a task as quickly as possible.
Okay.
It might be an email, it might be something larger like a project, but there's a lot of emphasis on getting to that task as quickly and as soon as possible. Yeah. And that might seem like a little insignificant, low-value thing, but if you think about all of those incremental gains across all of the people working at the company all around the world, you help develop momentum, which gets things done quicker.
Yeah.
The second thing I'll speak to is genuine care. And genuine care is about caring for your customer and caring for your colleagues. I'll give you an example. My sister has recently had a baby. I now have a nephew.
So you're an uncle.
I am, thank you. And my sister asked me to put up a shelf in her house. So I pulled out my tools and I fixed the shelf into her wall. And I had to make sure that I was very careful, because if I didn't mount that shelf in the correct way, it might fall and hurt her child.
Sure.
And we practice the same thing at Deel. Everything that we do must be done in a careful way so our customers and colleagues are protected.
So, yeah, I think, and also the universality of that as well. Like, we look at some companies like a Walmart as an example. One of their core values is respect for the individual, which makes sense to a Western audience. But if you go to some more collective cultures in Asia, that doesn't make as much sense. But something like genuine care really resonates everywhere.
Exactly. At Deel, we're 2,500 people in 100 different countries.
Yep.
And we have just about every time zone, just about every culture, and cultural differences are meaningful within a company, and looking for themes that are common within those cultures and then focusing on those within the company is something that's really important and something that we have consciously done as a business to ensure that everyone has mutual territory to relate to.
Absolutely. And the thing about being able to reach this hyperscale, it's not just a cultural thing. It's about actually creating structures and processes, or what we call momentum builders, to enable that. So what are some of the momentum builders you've created to engage such a diverse group across so many time zones and countries?
Yeah, the first thing that we have done as a business is we have been global from day one. We haven't set up a traditional headquarters in a single country. We haven't gone out to then secondary countries to set up subsidiaries and set up expansion markets. We've been global from the outset. Yep. And that has made it very easy for us to hire the best people no matter where they're located, and very easy for us to grow our business, solicit customers, and grow revenues globally. I'm very happy to say that as of last year, we now generate more revenue from companies outside the US than inside the US.
Absolutely. And that's actually a huge pivot point in the company, because often, maybe not with Deel because of how core global is, but it's sort of a side project, international growth, until it gets to a certain size. I think the other thing that's interesting, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is a pivot point that seems to happen in business is when headquarters and the home market detach from each other. So usually what happens is whoever's in charge of a certain function, CMO for the or chief of marketing for the whole company is also in charge of that function for the home market. But then a shift happens where that home market is treated like every other market. I don't know, how do you view that as a pivot point? How did that relate to Deel's growth?
I think the hub and spoke headquarters model can actually be growth prohibitive.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important for companies that aren't global first to decentralize operations, decentralize budget, decentralize decision making. I've seen other businesses which haven't done that, and they've grown very slowly. I mean, it's taken them years to set up in those international markets, and then once they're live in international markets, it's taken them even longer to grow revenues, get customers, and retain those customers. So decentralization and moving away from the kind of hub and spoke, all of the decisions are made in headquarters is really important.
Yeah, the way we pose it is it's not about being command and control, but it's about being an enabler and supporter of what's happening in different markets. And that's just a big shift because, like you said, without that, then everyone's always looking to headquarters for what to do. But one of the big ingredients of that is around giving a level of autonomy and building trust. So what's some of how that works at Deel and how you fostered that?
I think that we need to listen to people that are the experts in country. It's very easy for headquarters to get too focused on control.
Yeah. And
you need to let some of that control go, and you let some of that control go in a safe way through trust, through trusting your team, giving them the autonomy to make decisions. And one of the things that I've noticed is when going international, using the kind of traditional model where a company is not global first, the company tries to localize absolutely everything. They try to localize the language in their product. They try to localize the HR processes. They try to localize revenue recognition. What I found is that you probably only need to localize maybe 20% of your platform. You probably don't need to localize the other 80% because your customers don't care. Your customers can figure out the English parts of the platform that they don't really use. The core part, yeah, you need to have that localized, but other areas of the business do not need to follow suit.
Yeah, and one thing we found about localization, we like to use the analogy of an iceberg. Because often if you think about go-to-market on the top, operational on the bottom, most companies think about the go-to-market on the top. We need to change the language, we need to change the currency and the marketing message, and we're good. But there's so much under the surface in terms of infrastructure and such. And companies like Deel, you can be an enabler for that. You can, instead of having to build from scratch in every country, you can jumpstart much quicker by using a lot of the tools, services, programs that you have.
Exactly, and our tools help in the HR area.
Yeah.
For example, employee onboarding and employee management is so highly variable around the world.
Yeah.
Here in Brazil, when you're onboarding an employee, the employee must do a medical check. They must go to a doctor and be checked out, and then that check is then used in the social security registration. Whereas in Egypt, for example, male employees have to certify that they've completed mandatory military service. That's so foreign to me as a British citizen and probably you as an American. You know, we've never heard of things like that. So Deel has figured all of that stuff out. We've spent a huge amount of resources doing that in over 100 countries around the world, and our customers are able to hire anyone, anywhere at the click of a button.
Absolutely. And so one thing that's really powerful about this new era of business where the team is distributed is that innovation doesn't just come from headquarters. It's not top-down, command and control, here's what you do. But there's a lot of great innovations that might work in Egypt, but also work in Brazil and other places as well. How does Deel look at that, and how have you taken advantage of it?
I think it's about identifying common themes between people, between countries, between corporations, and making sure that those common themes are at the core of your infrastructure. That's what makes international expansion very quick. We set up, I think, 80 countries in 12 months and 100 countries in 18 months.
That's
wow. I've not heard of any other company that's done that. And we had to do some pretty strange things. I used to fly around the world with a HP printer in my luggage. So when I would arrive in, I'd arrive in parts of Eastern Europe.
Hopefully a small one at least.
It was super small.
Yeah.
But we would arrive in the hotel, print off documents, notary would come and meet in the reception, and then we would file incorporation documents at Secretary of State. Yeah. And what's really interesting is the variability of this process around the world. In the US and the UK, this is pretty easy to do, and parts of Europe also very easy. You get to LATAM, and it's particularly hard, especially in Argentina. It's taken us about 18 months to just incorporate the company and get the relevant license.
Yeah, and these are the things you don't think about when it comes to growth. You think about product and you think about language localization and things, and there's so much under the surface that are needed.
Totally, totally. Tax strategy is also a big part of it. Where are you selling to? Where are you paying tax? Sales tax remittance, sales tax collection, refunds. All of this stuff needs to be figured out, and a lot of companies just don't think about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm curious to get a little bit more into some of the localization stories you have. That 20% that you said has to be localized. Any good examples of things you've had to navigate? Part of it is also when you want to operate at scale. Like you said, you can't change everything, otherwise you can't scale. So how do you decide what to change, what not to change?
I think certain government organizations are very helpful at enabling companies to expand into their geography. I'm going to use Taiwan as an example. Sure. Very hard to set up in Taiwan. I've been to the Taiwanese embassy in New York 3 times. The first time I arrived, I was with a stack of documents and instructions from a legal counsel.
Okay.
I called my legal counsel when I arrived. I was like, hi, I've arrived at the embassy. I'm ready to file with the Secretary of State. Queued up, went to the desk, and the gentleman there said, no, you have the wrong documents. Please leave. Go away. So I did. We made a second attempt. Again, didn't check out. Third attempt, we got it right.
Okay.
So I think governments can really empower and accelerate expansion into geographies, and they're really the catalyst, right? And it's really nice to see here in Brazil, it's actually very easy to do business here relative to other countries in LATAM.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's one other thing that I think everything that the way Deel is set up and has enabled its growth is this concept we talk about called two-way innovation. So it's not headquarters saying how we do it. It's interesting things happen in different places. But a lot of that comes with hiring the right team members, right? So a term that we coined is called being an entrepreneur. So not just being agile thinking, but having a cultural mindset, a cultural sensitivity. How have you incorporated that in your team, or how have you looked for that in terms of the talent you've brought in?
We've looked for a key person in every large market that we operate. We call them the country manager. Yeah. And the country manager is responsible for building a full stack sales and marketing team, and that includes everything from product marketing, brand marketing, sales development and research, and actually account management and account executive functions. And that country manager has the objective to spread the word of our business. And you may have seen here in Rio and in Brazil, we have a lot of billboard marketing. We have billboards at the airport, we have billboards along the highway, and that is down to our country team, right? Yeah. They made the decision to spend the budget that we have in Brazil on billboard marketing, and specifically around this event, the Web Summit Rio, and that's working really well for us. We're seeing a lot of leads over the past couple of weeks.
And so you have that local context, but how do you ensure that there is cultural alignment with the company culture, that there's trust built, and you understand that these local teams understand how to get things done at headquarters when a localization is needed, for example?
I think this is all down to good onboarding and learning and development.
Okay.
I think that it's often overlooked.
Yeah.
And learning and development programs, onboarding programs are nowhere near as comprehensive and developed as they should be. I will cite a tweet of Elon Musk when he took over Twitter, and he was mocking the onboarding and L&D program of Twitter. And he was saying, how could something so important have such little attention put into it? Yeah. And especially when you're working on a global basis with a remote team, it's really important you have a very high standard of onboarding, learning, development, and enablement.
So the other thing that's exciting about this new era is that to a certain extent, you're not alone in the process of expanding, especially to new markets globally. So if you think about it in the past, if you were building a tech product decades ago, you had to buy servers and you had to manage those servers and everything. Now you just open up a AWS or Azure or whatever cloud account and it's available. That's also happening now in other spots, including in HR and hiring. And so there are companies like Deel that can really help make that process a lot easier. So how should companies think about what to keep in-house versus what to outsource?
Well, first of all, there are always a lot of exceptions. It's not as easy as just opening up a cloud computing account and deploying your infrastructure. For example, in India or Russia, there are in-country data warehousing requirements. So data must be housed in-country. And in some cases, with financial data, financial information, in India, for example, paper records must be kept. So there are service providers actually printing off financial ledger data and storing it in a premises in India.
Yeah.
So the way I think about it when it comes to the buy versus build and using different infrastructure to go global, I think take a practical approach. There's no way that we're going to set up real estate in India and print off documents and store them there. We're most definitely going to use a vendor for that. And I think you take the same practical approach in every country that you operate in around the world.
And also enabled by Deel and other companies, going to international markets is not as big of a thing as it used to be. It used to be we're going to hire a large group of people, we're going to open a physical office like you're talking about, we'll have this big ribbon cutting or whatever. Now it's much more iterative, much more agile. So talk about how Deel approached it that way and also how you enable other companies to do that.
Yeah, so on the Deel platform, companies can use us to engage international contractors, they can use us to employ people through our employer of record model, or they can employ them directly and we will process payroll. We have factored in many supporting technologies to make that process really easy on a global level. For example, we have a partnership with WeWork, which allows companies to instantly provision WeWork access straight through the Deel platform.
Cool.
Similarly, we have a partnership with a company called Hoffi, and Hoffi allow companies to provision equipment internationally. So let's say I'm a US, New York headquartered company. I want to hire someone here in Brazil. I want to employ them through the employer of record model. I want to give them WeWork access here in Empahima. I want to give them the latest MacBook Pro. Very hard to buy MacBooks here in Brazil, or very expensive at least. All of this can be done through the Deel platform, and you can get that person set up in minutes. But more importantly, we will help you manage that person and manage their employee life cycle over the next however many years they're engaged and employed. And what I mean by that is we also provide provisioning of benefits, healthcare benefits, insurances. We make sure that paid time off policies are compliant in both here, Brazil, and also work with a company's global policy. We ensure that other time off scenarios like maternity, paternity leave, PTO, is all working and with a clear system of record.
Yeah, and you've used the term a couple times, like overlooked, and I think that's what a lot of this is. Like when you were describing your great process, I was reminded of when I worked at AT&T, and I didn't have access to a building or like my laptop for a week or something like that, right? And when you look at companies that want to hyperscale, just taking those things that aren't core to their function and enabling them is huge. So what would you say some of the top keys to Deel's success in reaching other markets has been so quickly?
I think being global from the outset is really important, and that means so many different things from so many different vantage points. Being global with the regulatory model that you operate. Be global with the banking model that you're going to use behind your business. We have 450 bank accounts around the world. Be global with who you're hiring. Don't hire people within a 50-mile radius of the headquarters. And don't necessarily hire people because you want to go to that country. Just hire the best person. Focus on the skills, not the location. And all of this stuff will make it easier for you to go global at a later date. So you're kind of unconsciously globalizing from the outset.
Absolutely. Yeah, we talk about thinking global from day one and how you don't want to just, and for us, we're really passionate about helping Brazilian entrepreneurs. Our book is being translated next year into Brazilian Portuguese, and we're localizing it with different stories. But we don't want Brazilian entrepreneurs to just think about building a company for Brazil or building a company for Latin America, but building global companies. And so a lot of this mindset we're talking about and taking tools and things are really core to that. What are maybe some of we were talking about often overlooked or counterintuitive things that companies don't think about that they should be thinking about when they're building global from early on?
I think that we find companies take a snapshot of a country at a certain point in time, but they don't necessarily keep current with current events and affairs. For example, I've seen companies hire people in Argentina or hire people in Turkey where we've seen very high, even double-digit monthly inflation rates. And people have been severely affected by that. The value of their currency has been obliterated, and companies don't understand that they really need to support these people through adjusting compensation packages. And it's really bad for that to happen bottoms up. It's much better for the company to be staying current with local affairs and being able to provide that guidance and provide that assistance top down.
Absolutely. So I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I'd love if you can just share one piece of advice that you have for companies that are just starting to scale or have aspirations of scaling, how they can do it, somewhat close, maybe not as good as Deel has done it, but how do you prepare yourself, and what's that one piece of advice to be able to reach the scale you have?
Start with a global lens and always focus on problems at hand. It may be that you're able to operate in an international country with very few problems to solve. Focus on those problems, solve them, and you're able to do business.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the example that Deel presents, and also for enabling other companies.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.